I think we're trying to go to
Is that
stream.
good? Welcome to the study session, August 3rd, 2020, for the city of Abilene, Kansas. Due to COVID-19 and social distancing, we are encouraging viewing all meetings virtually on the live streamed City of Abilene's YouTube page. The City Commission study sessions are for the purpose of providing the Commission the opportunity to study items in more detail. Next is open forum. This is an opportunity to bring up items to be informally addressed. The mayor may impose a time limit on the open forum. And at this time, do I have anyone that would like to speak during the open forum? Okay. Next item is the study item, levy agreement between the City of Abilene and the Department of the Army Corps of Engineers. City Manager Foltz.
We're going to have Lon address this, and this is an agreement that needs to be signed next week, and he's going to give you a little update on the 2019 damage that was done and what the Corps is planning on doing.
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, in late 2019, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced and called for, due to the flooding in this area, they called for some projects for levee rehabilitation due to the damage from the May flooding of last year. And recent retiree Kevin Stroda, who had served as our lead maintenance person and contact with the Corps of Engineers over the last 30 years or so, had submitted an application for Abilene, or we're the sponsor of this flood control project, and he had highlighted or noted several areas potentially that may have had accelerated damage from the May flooding in 2019. The Corps of Engineers comes out, evaluates, investigates, looks at damage, looks at pictures, and then they make the final determination. And they recognized 3 areas, and I have them on this map, and I for some reason had in my head we were still meeting over in the other room, so I thought, well, that would work, but so it's a little too small, but anyway, you can come up and look at it afterwards or whatever, but there are 3 areas that they have approved for levee rehab. Now, this is entirely funded by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They are getting ready to finalize the project. We're about 70% there, and they will be going out to bid probably in the last part of September, early October to contractors. The areas that I have highlighted here are, if you can picture, just above the community garden area and above Vine, the north end of the 300 and 400 blocks of Vine Street. Be directly across the creek from Northwest 5th and Elm. There are 2 areas there that are like back to back that they will be working on. They recognized, and then there's another area to the south here, which is down below Flint Hills Grain, and those are the 2 or 3 areas that will be doing some rehabilitation. So it'll be a pretty major project. They'll have to make access down through the flood levees that are there, and place armor rock and remove quite a bit of soil. So we will just be serving as their main contact and working with them. But the funding, all the bidding, everything will go through the Corps of Engineers, and so we are just serving as a sponsor. I did ask them. I met with them last Thursday, and I asked them, kind of an estimate of what they thought the scope of the work would be as far as cost goes, and they were pretty vague, but probably looking at $500,000 minimum, and then so it could be up from there, but that's kind of where they expect the work to come in. So hopefully, possibly the work can take place maybe in late fall, early winter of this year, potentially. And with that, I'll just entertain if you have any questions.
Too bad we can't get them to pay for more water places.
What's that?
Too bad they won't pay for more of our water problems.
Well, I think we're doing pretty good to get this, because I know there's,
Bet.
I'm certain, a lot of projects all over this part of the state. I don't know how widespread that flooding was in May of 19, but I think it was pretty widespread. So,
That's great.
that's it.
Well, I noticed there's a certification regarding lobbying. Just, did you read that? The
Logging?
lobbying, L-O-B-B-Y-I-N,
Lobby.
lobbying. I don't know, since they're taking the bids, I'm surprised we have to sign that. But
Well, I think they
Because
just
it
want to
is-
make sure that we're on board and agree with them. Like I said, there's no cost to the city at this. However, we will serve, again, we are the sponsor, so everything that goes through the flood control, even if somebody wants to do construction within 500 feet of our flood levees, the city of Abilene is responsible to forward that information to the Corps of Engineers, as we are the sponsor of that, so.
Well, doesn't that lobbying also protect them from us? You know, like if I had a big construction company under a different name, I couldn't be in on it.
yeah, that's one.
Okay, yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Thanks, Lon.
Thank you, Lon.
You want to move that back, Lon? Go ahead and move it back by the door, and then when they leave, they can sure look at that. Thank you.
Does anyone have any further questions for Lon? Next item is the airport master plan. Hi, can you,
I think this is on. Is it on? Yep.
you'll probably have to talk closely to it so they can hear it
You can
through
pull
your-
it out and hold it up to
I
you.
might just
if you
do
have
this.
to.
I might just do this. That might be easier.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
Hello, Brad Waller from Alfred Benish and Company. We are the current engineering consultant for the airport services agreement at the airport to complete the master plan. We've worked for a few years now to get the master plan for the airport up and running. And glad to say, as of today, basically, we're all but done with it and presenting it to you just to give you some ideas. This is going to be kind of a goofy little presentation, I guess, without being able to use some visual aids, but I'll do my best here. But basically, we went through with the master plan and did a total complete ALP narrative of the master plan, where we looked at existing conditions, future growth patterns of the airport and of the community and of the region. We identified a design aircraft for the airport. From that, we looked at what are the minimum design requirements that are required of your airport. And then once we had what the minimum design standards are, we looked at what are the future construction mechanisms that would be needed to meet those demands of the minimums. And then looked at a capital improvement program, how that would look to be constructed and built over the future. The planning horizon is 10 to 20 years. And then we looked at a financial stability analysis of the airport. All of that's included in the about 500 or 600 page document that I handed to Marcus before I came in here. And it also includes about a 50 page airport layout plan, which is kind of the roadmap for the airport. The reason for doing that is to make a long story short, FAA will help fund and participate in projects that are on an approved master plan, and we now have an approved master plan. That's our roadmap for the future. So without exhibits in front of me, the first thing I really wanted to hit on quick is about every few years, KDOT Aviation commissions a study of airport economic impacts of airports across the state. I always like to hit on this on projects because I know the airport can be somewhat forgotten or looked at as not a necessity to the community. Not a lot of people necessarily in the community will be out there, will see it and find it valuable. KDOT's most recent study looking at all the aerospace manufacturing and employees, the safety benefits, the health benefits, the aeronautical spray, agricultural spraying, hobby pilots, businesses, emergency response. I mean, all that kind of ties into this airport. But in the state of Kansas, the economic benefit of aviation is roughly 92,000 jobs statewide. or a total payroll of $4.4 billion, or an economic impact of about $20.6 billion. That is the statewide. They then break it down into airports, and just looking at Abilene Airport specifically, it equates to roughly 30 jobs on a yearly basis, with a total payroll of almost $900,000 and a total economic output of $2.6 million. There's that studies online. I can direct you to where it's at if you'd like to go for further reading and look into it. But basically what I want to say is the airport is a business of this community. It does provide economic benefit. It does provide jobs. It does help protect what I would say Kansas' #1 export is, which is aerial spray plane agricultural operations. So that said, the existing runway is 4,100 foot long by 75 foot wide, oriented roughly north-south. And it does have some challenges in its current location. Without visual aids, this is probably going to go a lot faster. So the existing runway is 4,100 foot. The ultimate runway is 5,000 foot. The ultimate runway will help bring in future jet traffic, increase load capacity of the airport. Basically, the runway itself for FAA, they think will be sufficient for what it is. Okay, the actual design aircraft for the airport and the use of it is about 4,300 feet. In coordination with FAA, in coordination with the airport board, in coordination with the city, we wanted to show what is an ultimate 5,000 foot runway, which is where we would like to get the airport to be for the future. That is for planning purposes. It shows future land acquisition, and it shows the extension. That extension primarily is to the south of the airport, away from town. There's existing 2100 Boulevard or 2100 Road Avenue to the immediate south of the airport. That avenue would ultimately be relocated further south, approximately 1,000 feet, to make room for the extension. And along with that extension, the main concern with the existing airport is the north end of the airport, where the proximity to the railroad tracks are to the existing runway. We're very close to that runway and that railroad tracks. So everything with the runway is based upon imaginary surfaces, based upon the design aircraft. Obviously, approach minimums, or how far out you need to go, or how low you need to be at a airport like Abilene would be different than like Kansas City or Los Angeles, where they'll need a lot bigger area, a lot flatter area, a lot more precision approaches. But that said, the north end does present challenges with the proximity to the airport, where proximity to the railroad tracks. Those railroad tracks are an obstruction to the airport. We looked at approximately 1,000, or over 100, almost 1,000 obstructions in coordination with FAA. An obstruction is potentially considered to be anything above ground, even ground itself, depending on the elevation. But in Kansas, we don't have to worry about that too much, being pretty flat. But is anything telephone poles, buildings, structures, center line of streets, center line of railroad tracks, antenna towers, water towers, things like that. We submitted on over 900 to FAA and coordinated with them through all that. And in all that coordination effort, we came back with about 40 points or so that are considered and deemed obstructions, not only primarily to the existing runway, but also to the ultimate configuration. And really, as we've gone through that, that's kind of been identified as the #1 priority with FAA, is to get the obstructions mitigated. Obviously, the health and hazard and navigation to aircraft is the #1 priority, making sure they're safe. The reason, I'm going to start with some of the easier ones. And again, I'm just trying to hit some of the high-level ones here. There's the water tower to the northwest part of the airport. I don't have the road labeled, but it does not have a red light on it, a red flashing obstruction beacon. That needs to be added. I'm going to get to real quick how we're going to do this, or the thought process to pay for this. Don't get concerned, I guess, at the moment of the cost here. But I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what the obstructions are, so we can kind of go forward. There's also a radio tower down to the southeast of the airport, about 3 miles out of town. It's the tall one. It's about 200 foot tall, right there on the highway. It's not lit either, so we need to look at getting those lit. FAA will say lit or removed. Obviously, the water tower is not going to be removed, but that's a pretty easy fix to get it lit. There's some trees immediately north of the terminal area hangar, right alongside the airport property, that are causing some issues the building issues, the transitional surface, I'm sorry, I was trying to identify that. Transitional surface, which is basically perpendicular to the runway. There is one on the very southwest part of the airport, the pump stations. There is one antenna that sticks up out of one of those the pump station buildings, about 10 feet too high. So it needs to be either lowered or removed or whatever we can do to look at that. I think that hopefully is a pretty easy mitigation. And then that's really it from the airport to the south. I mean, that's the minimal things around. The big issue is the railroad tracks and then some of the trees to the north end of the airport. As you come in, basically, what FAA is saying is you do your imaginary approach. You have to add 23 feet to the center line of the railroad tracks, or to the tracks itself, I should say. And a plane needs to clear it at the prescribed minimum slopes that we look at. And right now it doesn't. We're going to look at doing a displaced threshold potentially in the future. That will likely come into play, but we still need to look at doing obstruction mitigation for those, for the railroad tracks. What that will ultimately be, obviously to mitigate it, you either move the runway, you move the railroad, or you do some compromise, because we both know those aren't going to happen. This compromise is basically going to be adding poles that have red lights on it, probably on the north side of the railroad tracks. That'll help indicate to pilots that there's a potential issue there, make sure they're above it. In addition to that, the only other obstructions that are out there are trees to the north side of the airport. About a year ago, we worked with the airport board. They worked with the railroad to remove trees on the south side of the railroad tracks that are on railroad property. They were taken care of. Unfortunately, they didn't go far enough out. We tried to say go farther than that, and we didn't. So there's some trees there that need to be taken out on the south side of the airport tracks. And then really, as we're looking at 2nd Street or 3rd Street, what's the one immediately north there? I can't zoom in on my...
Southwest
John's
Second.
Road.
John's Avenue.
Is it John's, right north of the...
Right.
You're correct, Johns Avenue. Thank you. There are trees just north of Johns Avenue in kind of the residential area. There's about 2 blocks wide of them that are causing some issues into the approach. And again, if I had a visual aid, or I could pull it out and show you from the map, but to show. Most of them are within current city right-of-way, apparently. City right-of-way at St. John's or the north-south ones that there's no street there, but the city does have the right-of-way. The rest of them are on private property. So that's going to be a little bit of something to look at, is how we get access to it, or if we get access, whether we remove the trees or top the trees, things like that. So that really is the number one priority as we're going forward. With the airport, I'm going to skip kind of to the end. Funding sources that are out there, and again, if you have questions, let me know. I know this is kind of a very high-level view. There are really 3 funding sources for the airport. First one is FAA entitlement funds. The airport is part of the NIPIAS, the National Program of Integrated Airport Systems. And as part of that national system, the City of Abilene gets $150,000 a year in entitlement funds. Those entitlement funds are banked up to 4 years. After 4 years, you quote-unquote lose them, so you can bank up to $600,000. In FY21, which will be basically next calendar year, this airport will have $600,000 banked for a project. That requires a 10% local match to secure those fundings. I know Marcus coordinated him with the budget. I believe there's budgeted for a project next year for the airport. So it is there and it's ready. And then that funding source continues to circle. So as you use it or it depletes or it goes away, the next 150,000 kicks in every year. You also have the opportunity to compete for money on the FAA on discretionary funds. So if you're doing a runway or a project that's going to be larger than $500,000 or $600,000, that's how you would get to that. You have to compete on a national level, get a priority scoring ranking system. That can be somewhat tough to get into at times, but it depends really on the criteria and what else is being asked for. That is also a 90-10 match for larger projects. The third funding source is really KDOT Aviation. Every year they solicit for AIP funding. Their submittals are due in end of September for their yearly cycle. They have about $5 million of pool of money that they can send out. Typically it's a 90-10 match. Again, but KDOT does, their funding does differ depending on the type of project, but most of the projects that you would see that would get funded are the 90-10. Now, one of the things that they are also consider we can do with KDOT Aviation would be the economic development funding, if we can show economic job creation and or loss and economic output. The reason I bring that up is there's probably two simultaneous paths I think the airport's going on right now. Number one is looking at replacing the T hangar, the 10-place T hangar that was demolished in the storm. I'm sure everybody's aware of it, but we have insurance money in the amount of $225,000, I believe it is, and we have bids in the amount of about 500 and some thousand to construct. So obviously there's a gap there. At our board meeting, airport board meeting on Wednesday, we kind of discussed, looked at it, decided we wanted to approach KDOT Aviation to see if we could do an emergency AIP funded project to get the, basically pick up the difference. It's going to be very, very favorable to the community to show that we're not doing a 10% match. You're doing a 225,000 out of the 500 and some thousand. I did have conversations with KDOT Aviation today, and they are interested. We're trying to set up a meeting for Thursday to get a meeting set up with Bob Brock, the director of aviation. But they did suggest the economic development funding too. So there's two funding sources there that we may pursue and look at. I said the one earlier is a 90-10, but with the 225,000, which we'll probably put forward towards it, we're gonna cover it that way, I guess. So hopefully we'll have some good conversations in the next couple of weeks with KDOT. We'll get an application submitted and coordinate with them to hopefully pick up the difference for the hangar replacement building. The second avenue is the other projects that we'll use FAA funding for. The obstruction removal is FAA's number one goal. The safe flying obviously being the number one reason there. Before we can attack that, we have to do an environmental assessment. An environmental assessment looks at everything to do with the airport, from socioeconomic conditions to sound to light to endangered species to Indian burial grounds to everything that can be associated with the airport. I don't exactly know how much that's going to take, but we're kind of trying to coordinate with FAA to figure that out and how that's going to go. So before we can really do any sort of mitigation, we have to do this basic environmental assessment. That's probably going to happen in FY21, so next year. The following year, most likely, will be the obstruction removals and mitigations. The other three projects that are out there that I know are important to the airport board is one is extend the runway to the 5,000 feet. We're going to have trouble justifying to FAA the length to get the funding match. And even if you do, you're talking probably in the 3 to 4 million. Price tag at a 10% match is going to be $300,000-400,000 to the community. So that's going to be a big project for obvious reasons. The other one is construct a terminal building. The terminal building out there is 67 years old and in pretty rough condition, so they've been looking at different avenues to fund that and look at that in the future. The other one would be relocate the north apron taxiway and expand the apron there. So those are kind of the up-and-coming projects over the next few years that this master plan's identified that are going to be the number one priorities. So really to close out, and again, open for any questions, but where we go from here, we're going to coordinate with KDOT Aviation to try to fund the roughly $400,000 difference in the T hangars, see if we can get that off center and get that moving. I think that'll be a very good benefit to the airport. We're going to coordinate with the FAA on the environmental assessment, needs and wants and what's going to happen there. And then as that's happening, basically today concludes ours and Benish and my involvement, quote unquote, with the airport. So you need to go out for consultant selection. Probably need to do that in the next couple of months. You will be getting the letter, and we've already gotten a letter from FAA kind of asking and coordinating it, but probably about September, you're going to get the letter from FAA. They're going to say, are you ready to go? You're going to want to do selection. Do you have your consultant on board? That type of thing. You're going to want to do it probably for just the environmental assessment to get that moving, and then that'll go from there. And then the following year, do an engineering consultant selection for more of the 5-year variety. So that's where we're at. Any questions? That's a lot of information. Yes.
If we reach that dream world of a 5,000-foot runway, would that set us up for hopper station, you know, make here to KC or whatever, would that make the runway enough for that type of stuff?
I mean, it could. The runway would be long enough for that type of activity,
Okay.
but as far as getting that involved this close to Salina, I mean, I don't know the economics of that, or if a
But it would
business
make the
company.
runway okay.
I'm sorry.
It would make the runway sufficient though.
It should, yes, depending on the type of aircraft. Really, I mean, not only do you have to look at length and width, you have to look at the pavement condition, not condition, the structure of it and what can it, you know.
Sure.
We could make that thing long enough and wide enough to land a 747. The problem is that's going to be way too heavy for the
Yeah, you need
existing,
to-
so we'd have to reconstruct the entire thing. So that's something to consider too. But yes.
One of the questions on those FAA entitlement funds, that $150,000 every year, I remember in past, if we don't, like, I know we've had times where we haven't used those funds and we allocate them to another community. And so that's also a case as we come across these projects, potentially we could get some community funds from those other communities if they're not using them.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, basically, if you don't use your $150,000, it goes back into the bucket, back probably in Washington D.C., and it goes who knows where. So KDOT Aviation has really stepped in the last few years and basically said if airports aren't able to or aren't wanting to or for whatever reason just didn't tap theirs, they're pushing it to other airports in Kansas. So KDOT Aviation and FAA are working really well together to try to, you know, obviously the need for money as is everywhere. There's more projects than there is money, and they're trying to balance as best they can and make sure they're getting pushed around and making sure the money stays in Kansas. So yes, you know, if you're over by a couple $100,000 or you need to do a $900,000 project, that is an avenue that they're trying to help. But you're obviously at the mercy for what kind of projects or what, you know, is it one of those years where there's a lot of airports not doing money or not?
I have a question. The $225,000 that we got for insurance, and it's costing us $500,000 to replace that. Apparently, our insurance wasn't replaceable or what was it? Why a half, you know, $250,000 difference?
And this is Finance Director Marcus Rothschild. I actually reached out to Doug Smart last week, and he was on vacation. So I'm going to follow back up with that question because Jane did ask me just right before the airport meeting on Wednesday to follow up with Doug on that. And so we were going to look into why we wouldn't have had full replacement costs
Full
on that from the
replacement, yeah.
beginning. And because I'm not sure when that policy went into place or what type of condition that hangar was in when we initiated that. So I've got to get a little more history from Doug on that,
Okay.
and then I can report back to you.
Thank you.
This is Jane Foltz, City Manager. So as far as I know, Doug told me that the airport was under its own policy. It is not under the city blanket policy, which we do have replacement on our city buildings. So that was the reason that we are looking further into this, and we will have an answer for you on Monday.
Okay. And then I have one more question. So apparently, the board for the airport makes the budget, is that correct? Or who
This-
actually makes the budget for the airport? I'm just,
This is Finance Director Marcus Rothschild. The airport board, they do offer suggestions and project suggestions. Ultimately, the city does make the budget for
Make the
the
budget for it.
airport,
Okay.
and that is just a part of the overall budget that would be brought to the commission annually.
and then there is 30 employees at the airport?
No.
There isn't?
No.
Oh,
The study basically looks at first and second round impacts, and it helps to support 30 jobs or the
oh, I
equivalent
see.
of 30
Okay.
jobs.
All right, I
I'd
misunderstood.
say one of them, especially for Abilene, would be farmers. I mean, if they're out doing spray plane, there's probably,
The ag
we do
sprayers.
have, I don't know how many ag sprays, 2 or 3 come in a year, plus the one that's based here. So there's probably a good 8 to 10 jobs just in itself throughout the year, and then the
Okay.
farmers and,
Mhm.
you know, just the second round impacts. Obviously, if we're paying somebody to come here to this community for a month to do spray plane, they're buying gas here, they're buying food here, they're probably staying here, just that whole second round impacts.
Okay. I
Bringing
see.
the money to town, I guess, is the big
Right.
thing.
And just as a reminder, this is Jane Foltz, city manager. The Airport Advisory Board is just that. They are an advisory board. Marcus sits down with them every year. They go over projects. We haven't been able to do that because we've been waiting on this master plan. It's been in the works for Brad, have you been with us?
About
2.5,
almost
almost
3
3 years. So that's why we had to give away or give back that 150 that went to another community that was doing a project. We couldn't use that, but we do have the 600,000 sitting there waiting for us for a project. So just as a reminder, that advisory board does work with city staff and looks at those projects, but now we'll have a roadmap for a 10 to 20-year outlook, and that's a good thing. So you'll have that before you on Monday to approve that.
And this is Finance Director Mark Rothschild. I was going to ask while we were here just about the presentation and how to get the information to you. It is a large packet, the master plan, so that's why we didn't necessarily have that included in today's packet. And so we can offer different options, some accessibility, either online or there's a Dropbox feature that we can share. And so I was just trying to get an idea of how you guys would best like to access the information. We could provide you with a hard copy. I know Brad brought some, and I'm sure we'd be able to get more if needed. But I thought before we printed a bunch of 500-page hard copies, I'd kind of get an idea of what the commission would prefer, and if you guys have some ideas on how you'd like to review it, or if you need a copy or not. So,
Yeah, this is Commissioner Way. The digital copy is fine with me. So.
I'm the same way. If it's 500 pages, I can sit there and read them from my computer.
And so you'll need that Dropbox feature. So, okay,
Works for me.
there you go.
You
That'd
got
be
it,
great.
Marcus. If you need anything, let me know.
yeah, I can share. Yeah, I can share that with commission then. So.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's, thank you. Unless anyone else has any more questions? That should probably be on regular agenda.
Yes, please.
And the one before I didn't mention, probably ought to be regular agenda also. Okay, thanks,
Yeah,
thanks.
if you have any more
much.
questions or anything else, don't hesitate to reach out. Marcus knows how to reach me for sure.
Thank you, Brad.
No problem.
Thanks.
Did you say you brought printed copies?
Yes,
Just
he's
one
got
printed?
he's got a couple of them. I can always get you more, Marcus, if need be. I can always get you more. Just let me know.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Next item is Southeast Drainage Preliminary Study, and that would be Mr. Boshaw.
I'm going to take this down below my nose so I can see you and my glasses don't fog over. Mark Bashamp with Olson, and what you have in front of you is a drainage study for the southeast drainage pipe, which is that existing 54-inch. That was studied in the years ago by another firm, and they essentially had called it out as being a pipe that was undersized, and that as far as they took it. What we did is took it to the next step and determined how much is it undersized and how can we develop a project that will assist you in working up a CIP for the future, and also the possibility of looking at maybe some other sources of funding for this. I just keep waiting on a stimulus package. Always is being talked about in these types of crisis, but we have not seen anything come out yet. This is set for that, and to where we've got an outline. So what I'm going to do is Jane provided you with the PowerPoint that I was going to show, and the project location would be on sheet 3, and the study, I'm trying to figure out, no, it'd be sheet 2.
Two.
Sorry,
You're right.
I put mine on double, and I want to make sure that I'm on the right
2.
one here. So on page 2, it shows a project location. We started at Northeast 4th and Brady, and studied the alignment clear down to the Oxbow to the river. there is parts of that 54-inch that we were able to locate based on Lon's experience of the pipe failing and collapsing, and we were able to shoot some of those locations. So we kind of was trying to pinpoint the location of that 54-inch. There is no record of that being within an easement, so and that thing is years and years old. It was probably placed and never recorded, or there just wasn't one. So that is a study alignment. First Street, all the improvements on First Street tied into that, which you're tying a 48-inch on First. I'm going from memory here. Over 72-inch? A 72-inch tied into a 54. So it was sized correctly for First Street, but tying into something that was undersized. And that's the reason why you've got a lot of water that comes out of and floods that area. So what the next page will show you is the drainage area. And I wish we had a big screen that could really show this. You can look at subbasin D, which is the upper subbasin, is about 300 acres. And what that does is that goes essentially from the railroad tracks north clear to 14th Street, it even includes downtown. So that's a big drainage area that comes down to the 4th and Brady area. And then you have everything to the south. So you essentially have over 700 acres of water that drains into this 54-inch. Okay? So a very large capacity. The next sheet shows you the land use. And you can see mainly in your area to the north, that bright blue is your residential of an eighth of an acre housing developments. You know, you have really dense housing, and then you have your commercial area, and then down at the bottom, you can see in that yellow is still row crop, still farmland, and everything. So all these different land uses was used to determine the future sizes of the storm sewer required to carry all that water out of town. We're going to get into now the alternatives that we looked at. So Exhibit 4, Alternate 1, looked at a 10-year storm. And that's a typical design of a stormwater system as a 10-year storm. And in the upper reaches, you're looking at a double 4.5-foot by 9-foot box. So you would be 4.5-foot tall, be the water going through, 4.5 by 9-foot wide, 2 of them side by side. So you're looking at 18-foot wide, 4.5-foot high to carry that amount of water, and that's in the upper reaches. Down below in the lower reach, you're looking at a double 4.5 by 11. That's over a 22-foot of a box structure. And if you look at that one dimension of almost 3,000 feet down below, that is a huge dollar amount of putting something underground of that size. And which reflects to about almost a $20.5 million project for a 10-year storm in Alternate 1, and that's keeping everything underground as it is today. So Alternate 2, what we looked at is, what if, since that cost is really high, what if we reduce that to a 2-year storm? And we were able to take some of that, like on the lower reaches, that 2-year storm reduced it down to a double 4.5 by 10 versus a double 4.5 by 11, and decrease the cost to just a hair over 15 million, decrease $5 million by just doing that. That is not our recommendation. We wanted to see what that did for the costing analysis. So alternate number 3 is what we really would be the preferred option, and that would to take everything from the lower end clear up to where we can make that into an open channel near the railroad. So just south of the railroad, you're looking at a 15-foot wide open channel at the bottom, and the water would be about 5.5 foot deep in that open channel. When you get down and you connect in the other basin, that's that 300 acre southern basin, you have to go up to a 30-foot wide channel, and it still would be a water depth of 5.5 foot in a 10-year storm. That drops the cost down to $15.7 million. So between the 2-year and the 10-year with an open ditch, about the same cost, but takes everything, and it's more maintainable with an open ditch instead of having a permanent structure underground. We'd also included in the cost estimates are also a concrete trickle channel bottom. Since everything is so flat to be built through there, we want to be able to have something that you can maintain in elevation and maintain the low flow in that channel, and that way you can get in and clean it and keep that thing maintained. If you left it just a grass bottom, as you know, with typical ditches, water will meander and you'll eventually have to cut, so we essentially put grade stops in there to essentially stop it from cutting in those locations. So slopes would also be mowable slopes, but you can think about that. That's going to take a lot of real estate. What I would think of being, well, I don't want to go to the next steps. I guess any questions with that, with all 3 alternatives, and then I can get into maybe what I see as next steps.
Okay,
D.
I'm sorry, Commissioner D. Marshall. First of all, this would take care of downtown area, the south
Yes.
of Tree. Now, there's an area of town over behind, it's on Brady, behind the nursing home where water comes and goes into Maple and goes into all those homes. Is that gonna take care of that too? Lon, you know where I'm talking about?
This is Lon Schrader, Public Works Director. Essentially and eventually, those do somewhat connect. However, the area behind the nursing home, I believe, at some point there, I think veers off to the southeast a little bit more and goes out underneath of, kind of heads out more towards Jeep Road. So I think they do intersect somewhat. If you're familiar with the trailer park over south of that on Brady, there's an area there where some of that water could eventually joins this system. But most of that, it takes off and goes to the southeast towards Jeep Road.
None of
So-
this is gonna catch that water before it gets to Maple. You know the area I'm talking about. 'cause you
No,
guys
most of
worked
that
on it.
water you're referring to there comes from clear north of 14th Street, comes from the Faith Avenue area. That water takes off out across the fields east of Abilene and is not
Will the
associated with
retention
this.
we're putting up there on Faith Avenue help that problem then if it's coming from there?
What you're
A
doing,
different drainage basin.
it's a different basin, is
Okay.
correct, yes.
Yeah.
It'll certainly help that basin, but it's independent of this one.
Okay.
To
Mine-
put this in a little better definition, if you can picture where the SRS building is, at the 3rd and Mulberry, 5th and the AT&T building at Northwest 5th and Cedar, behind the city building, would you picture these areas of 3rd and Spruce, 4th and Spruce? If you've ever been down to 5th and Brady or 4th and Brady after a big storm, as well as East First Street, those areas are all tied into this system. So that's kind of how I define it. The SRS is the end of the line. So the flooding you see there at 3rd Street, that is the high point, if you will, of this whole system.
My other question, Mark, thank you, Lon. These open basins that are gonna be 5.5 feet deep, are those in town or out of town?
Out of town.
Good.
Out of town. They would, now, that's an item that we just drew a line on a piece of paper.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're not gonna have neighborhood kids falling in and drowning.
That's a whole nother step,
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner.
Commissioner Schaefer, how many inches is a 10-year event? How many inches of rain?
I don't know if I can answer that right off the top of my head. I'd have to dive into the report and get at what a definition of a 10-year storm is.
Well,
It-
my next question is, how many 10-year storms have we had in the last 10 years?
You've had multiple.
Yeah.
10.
You've had multiple. But you have to look at a guide. We picked a 10 because that's what is industry standard. But yet, it depends on how much overbuild that you want to do. We have some that it depends on the cost, that are installing 25 and 50-year events that are underground. That can be something that can be looked at, is do you want to see what the cost would be to go to a higher frequency of a storm?
That wasn't the purpose of my question.
Oh, I didn't think it was, but that's the only way to solve it.
So in the open ditch, is it like a river? Will the ditch only handle what's coming through the drainage tile? Or could the ditch overflow?
The ditch very well could overflow. And the ditch, if you can think of it, the design ditch is 5.5 foot of water. But that ditch very well could be 8 foot deep. So the capacity of that ditch will hold a lot more water. When you get into design and you get to understand that maybe that ditch on the lower ends, maybe it's going to have to be 15 foot deep in order to get to the elevation you need at the upper end, the capacity obviously is going to hold more. It's your structures that's really going to be your design structures, is what you're going to design for the 10 or the 25 or the 50. But it's that open ditch that will actually have an additional capacity in there that could actually overflow and then come back in. Yeah.
Well, we've been in, Commissioner Marshall, I'm sorry, we've been in a weird weather pattern here lately, everybody knows that, but wouldn't the cost just skyrocket upwards for longer term?
Not necessarily. There's a project that we did that the cost maybe increased, 15, 20% to go to a higher frequency storm.
That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money, and it's a decision that we all have to make together, and as to what you want to do. I don't know. I mean, this is based on 10, and if you want some guidance for a CIP program as to what it would be for a 25 and 50, so you have something to choose from. I mean, we can sure pull that together in a memo to this as part of the summary, to give you a guideline to go off of. I mean, we can sure do that. That way you've got something to hang your hat on as to what frequency of storm that you would choose. If I look at this as sequencing, the first thing that really, you got to start at the bottom and you work your way up. You can't start at the top and work down. So if you choose the alternate for an open channel, then you would look at the first thing you was doing is securing the property for that and get that portion of the project done. And really, you can tie and bring that up to where the pipes really connect, because there is a connection point where the two come in, and bring it up to there, and then have another, and then look at whatever more years you want to go out to complete the rest.
If you can do that in just a memo without another full study, I'd be.
No, we would just attach it to the summary here and just amend this to determine, and then it would probably be based on, percentage, because let's say the box increases by a certain amount, then we would probably up the cost by that certain amount, percentage-wise.
Commissioner Schaefer, does the $15 million include property acquisition, or is that just construction cost?
Let me look here, there is a 30% contingencies. And let me see which one this is, alternate one. We would need. It does not, so we will need to add some dollars in here for easement acquisition.
If we want to do this, what is the next step? Is this to being paid for by bonds? Is that what we had talked about before? Is that correct? Be a bond issue?
This is Jane Foltz, city manager. We do not have this kind of money. The study was done because we need to get a CIP put together. I would guess that this would have to be bonded and phased over a number of years due to the cost. But I know that Lon and I have been here for a number of years, and we've known that this project was set aside or not looked at because of the cost of it. When we redid the First Street plan, they did upsize the pipe and the drainage there with the intent of someday we need to take care of this from the top to where it goes into the river at the Oxbow. I brought it to your attention, I think, in April when you approved this study to be done, for the reason being that possible stimulus money. But if not, we do need to start planning for the future of Abilene. We do have flooding, and many of you have seen it because of the 10-year floods that we're having every 2 years. So we felt it was important, knowing that we are not going to be here forever. I think there needs to be a plan for those who come after us. And the work that we have to do as a staff is decide how it is to be funded. And I believe it's going to have to be some type of bond issue.
This is Commissioner Marshall. I'm glad to see that we've started this. This is urgent, and I'm glad we started here, because this affects every citizen, because it affects our downtown.
It's 700 acres.
Yes.
That is a large portion of our population, correct? And the point today was for you to look, take time. It's a very thick study. You will have a copy of that study. Okay, yes, I passed that out yeah. And you can go through it. Lon and I have started through it, but, and Marcus and I we've talked about how are we going to fund this? That is the big question.
Chris will write a check.
That is a concern. So it's got to be done correctly over a span of time, and we've got to figure out, when do we begin?
Well, thank you, but I agree. We need to put this on our calendar to suspend it, keep on top of it,
Yes.
making sure that we are doing it the right way and proceed, because I don't want somebody else to have to deal with this 5, 10 years later. We need to look at it and be aggressive somewhat.
There needs to be a plan. Yes, there needs to be a plan. We just can't keep kicking this down the road.
Right.
And that's what we as a leadership team decided, that this needed to come forward. I appreciate that you allowed us to go ahead with this study. I appreciate Mark's work on this. He knows our town, and I do believe it's a project that is necessary. We just have to figure out how to pay for it.
When we kick the can down the road, it just ends up costing us a lot more money.
Yes.
We need to take care of these things.
So you will have time to go through this study and ask questions. Mark's going to put together that memo, but it's got a lot of great information about how things flow in Abilene, Kansas.
Commissioner Witt, I got another quick question for Mark. With the open channel design, and that you may not be able to answer this, but when this came before us to approve this study, I went and looked on Google Earth, and the updated Google Earth imagery was from June of last year, and I noticed the major part of the agriculture land of where this goes through had large flooding spots to it as well. So I'm curious, if we did that open channel design, it may also provide some sort of water drainage benefit to the landowner,
It could,
right?
could. I don't know where you're talking, you know, where water ponds or backs
Right.
up or, and so forth, if this channel could actually take advantage, or if that could use the channel to take advantage of that, I don't know, but that's a good question as to, can we place the channel in a strategic place that has other benefits to other property owners?
Yeah, because I'm wondering if that could help us with land
Well,
acquisition side.
it could,
Yeah,
it could, but we drew a line on a piece of paper.
right.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get anybody, I don't want to say we're going on yours. I mean, we just drew a line on a piece of paper so we didn't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I wanted to make a comment here for your benefit, hopefully. This is Lon Schrader, Public Works Director. Oftentimes when you start talking about storm drainage and the question comes up from the public, well, what do we use our storm drainage funds for? Because we do have a storm drainage fund. And I wanted to point out that, you know, storm drainage fund will pay for things like your Faith Avenue project, but probably one of the more major projects that we use storm drainage funding for was East First Street. And Jane mentioned that we upsized the storm drainage on East First, and I can't sit here and recite the exact amount that we contributed out of our storm drainage fund, but I think it was somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 of that $3 million project to upsize the storm drainage on First Street. What I do remember is the amount that we changed we increased the volume of the cubic feet from roughly 4,000 cubic feet to 43,000 cubic feet of water storm drainage on that project. So we built that with the intent, like Jane said, to eventually, you know, move that project and tie that into something larger.
Something that I glossed over on all of them. You got two major railroads in town. You can't open cut through a railroad. So we're boring 4 very large pipes underneath there, and which are very, very expensive. And at each end, you have major structures that tie all of them together. That is a huge cost to do that, to take all the water underneath the railroad, and you don't have an option. You got to cross it. So I didn't mean to gloss that over when I talked about it. I talked mainly on both ends, and I should have probably mentioned the middle too. It's just not a simple project with the railroad port piece. So.
And this will be underground until we get out into that agricultural area, like you asked about, would children be falling into ditches? Hopefully not, but in town, that will all be underground until we get to that open agriculture area.
I assumed that, it was just that 5.5 foot of water out there.
Yeah.
Kind of an off-the-wall question, Commissioner Schaefer. Would you open cut the Abilene Smoky Valley Railroad?
Only if we have permission. I mean, that's, yeah,
We could all
Be
go
a
down and
bridge.
help lay railroad ties to replace them.
yeah. Only if we have permission and then permitting process, so.
I think it's still underground in that area, and then once it gets past, the open ditch will be,
Yeah, but you would need new tubes there.
yeah. Yep, I think that's underground, yeah.
Do we have any further questions for Mark? Thanks so much, Mark. And next is Jane Foltz, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just am going to update our sales tax report. Marcus sent this to me a few days ago. Again, we are up 8%. That's for the April receipt, or the May receipts that were delivered in July. So for the year, we continue to be up at 8%. So that's good news. So every purchase made locally helps our economy, so continue to do that. And we ask residents to continue shopping locally, and if you cannot find it at home, via the internet, right, Marcus? As we're getting that sales tax through that opportunity. Also, census workers are out knocking on doors to get the task completed for the year. Please, if a local census worker knocks on your door, complete the information. This will help our city as well as our county if federal funding comes our way. Abilene has had 70.2 response. Dickinson County is at 66.5%, and Kansas overall is at 66.6%. So I know that they're trying to get that task finished, and I know there are some workers that are going out. I talked with one last week, so they were at a meeting and said it was going pretty well. Also, I met with the Prairie Fire developers last Friday to go over information needed as they work through their funding process. And then staff continues to evaluate non-essential property that are owned by the city, and we'll be working on a plan to disperse properties no longer needed by the city to get them back on the tax rolls. That's what I have for this week, and we will see you on Monday. And we'll just have a few items, the two today, which will be the levy agreement and the airport master plan.
Do you have a projected date on those properties that you will put up for sale?
We do not. We're working on a process with Aaron Martin, our city attorney. We're not sure if we're going to go through an agent, silent bid. We're still working through how to do that. But I know I've worked with Lon and Jenny Hyatt, put together a document for me, and I've shared that with Aaron. And we looked at properties that are no longer needed by the city, and we really feel there are some that need to be on the tax rolls. I've had some phone calls from people who have some adjoining property who would like to have an opportunity to bid on the property. We have some areas where we have more than one property owner that's adjacent that would like that property, so we may have an opportunity to get some things back on the tax rolls.
Correct.
Yeah.
The census, isn't that the thing everybody was mailed?
Everyone was mailed, and you had an opportunity to do it online, and some people choose not to, but it really would help our community, our county, and our state to get that completed. It's pretty simple. They don't ask you a lot of personal questions, just how many are in the household, so.
It was so basic. I did it the next day.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. That ends the study session for August 3rd, 2020 for the city of Abilene, Kansas. Thank you.